Good day again. Barry speaking for Voters' Voice. By now, I hope the phones and the email addresses of the MPs are running hot with your comments to them. But just in case they're not, I'll carry on with these videos. I've pointed out before that the people in charge of us, and that's who they are, they're in charge of us, are not looking after our interests at all. In the history of the world, they very rarely have, only when forced to do so. And in the history that springs to mind, modern history, going back to the First World War, the depression that followed it, horrific problems for the population at large. They were rewarded from suffering through that by a Second World War. Millions upon millions throughout the world died unnecessarily. We come out of the Second World War and we're faced with a world where one power has virtual control, domination of what goes on politically in most countries in the world. The USA has set itself up and has behaved as the dominant power. Right, we've established that's all fact. It can't be denied. Now, running on from there, we had a brief time in history running from 45 till probably the end of the 60s, where we had prosperity for the average person. Gradually, over the last 40 years at least, that's being eroded rapidly now. Our masters have set up the system to give themselves and the people that control them the massive benefits that they enjoy today. The wealth of the world has been siphoned into the pockets of the few, and of that there can be no doubt. Now, the main theme behind this is the very point I'm trying to make. They got away with it, and they're getting away with it again today because the average citizen is not monitoring their MPs, their so-called representatives. If you stop and think about it, the only time in history when that reversal of the people in charge and the people in charge of them, when they become very wealthy, and it's happened in the past, think of the crash of the 30s and what led up to that, and if you put that history with today's history, they're a mirror image of each other. The very warning signs that were there prior to the 1930s depression are blaring out their warnings. The sirens are going off again all over the world. The Western world has been so miserably led that we have never in the history of certainly modern history ever had leadership that is so bad. Which is one of the reasons why we took on the task of decimating the economy of Russia. It has become so glaringly obvious to us all by now that the way we're being run is not benefiting us at all. And it has become so obvious that the powers that be are beginning to become very wary. They're getting scared that we are all going to wake up. We need distracting. The other thing is, they sit in their little power palaces looking at the alternative world's economy, which is Russia, and in their heart of hearts, they're envious. The other side is their greed, which surmounts all other things, and they want the richness for themselves. It will alleviate the poverty they've left in their wake all over the world in their extreme measures of funneling the wealth of the world into the pockets of the few. This is really what triggered the sanctions against Russia. Those sanctions were going to bring Russia down. Putin, if he didn't die of cancer or some other imagined disease, the economy of Russia was going to crash. The government would fall apart and it would open up Russia again, just as it had been in the 90s. One major fly in that ointment was the economy they attacked the Russian economy with was a senile, decrepit, crippled old man knocking at death's door. The entire system is crashing around our ears and about to come to an end. We don't have this economic strength or even a glimmer of it to manage to do what these idiots set out to achieve. I liken the leadership we've had in the Western world, and here in New Zealand too, they're best be described as Judas goats. And a Judas goat, if you recall, or know, were the few animals that were trained to lead the sheep into the killing pens of the abattoirs. Our present leadership today is more akin to a Judas goat than they are to somebody who was supposed to be representing our interests. Now you may think, oh, it's the ravings of a silly old man sitting in front of this camera talking about that, but just stop and think about it for 1 minute. What happened in 2008 when the banks got to the point of collapse? Was the system changed? No. What happened? They used the taxpayers' money to bail the banks out. The banks couldn't be allowed to fail. Oh, goodness me, no, not a bit. We'll take the wealth of the people and funnel it through to the banks. And they've got so good at it, they've achieved from 2008 to 2022, they've managed to stagger this stumbling behemoth along to its present site, where its death throes are about to begin. Now, what happened after the 1930s depression to change things around, to alter the condition of the financial world to enable a recovery? The first thing that happened was Roosevelt, not because he was wanting to be kind to the population, but he simply had to do it to avoid what would have been basically a revolution. The people were so angry and so empowered by the poverty they were experiencing in the 1930s that they were at the point of marching. And Roosevelt went to the bankers and the movers and shakers and told them if he couldn't be given the power to change what was happening, there'd be blood in the streets. And they were so battered by the events of the stock market crash that self-preservation overran even their greed, and they went along with it. And what was brought in was called the Glass-Steagall Act, which turned the bankers from speculators. It separated the speculators in the banking world from the ordinary banking that has to go on in a modern society to fund a sound economy, house the people, feed and clothe them. Recently, the first thing our movers, our MPs, not here in New Zealand, but in America mainly, the power of the banksters was given back to them. That act was, we've got too much regulation. Government is interfering too much in our affairs, and big government is bad, and we must get rid of all government input and just have our private market rules. And the first thing they did was do away with the Glass-Steagall Act, which allowed, once again, the bankers to take depositors' money and speculate wildly with it. That led up to the 2008 crash. And did our leaders, did our people that we employ, that we vote in and pay very well to run affairs for us, did they wake up to the fact that that had created this? Oh, they knew about it, all right. They wouldn't do anything about it. Their best interests lie in obeying their masters above them, who are still hell-bent on using the banking system for their own ends, not for the good of the population or the world or anybody but their shareholders. I'll leave this broadcast there. I get angry, and it probably shows. You should be angry too, because it's being done to you. And unless you start speaking up, unless you start applying the brakes through the mechanism for the first time in the history of the world we have available to us, the end results are going to be absolutely catastrophic. I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you very much for listening to me. All the best. I recommend everybody out there keep their head down. It's a dangerous time we live in. But if you keep your head down, don't forget to keep your eyes open and your ears listening. It's important. All the best. Good luck. Catch you later.